Decca, welcome to the Treasures Lecture Series. My name is Beck Carland and I'm the Senior Curator of the History of Collections at Museums Victoria. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands our museums stand on, the people of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and also the Wurundjeri, on whose country I'm broadcasting to you from today, my home, and pay my deep respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is the first lecture since Treasures of the Natural World opened to the public, and it's been sold out for much of that time, actually. We're so thrilled that you could join us today for this sneak peek into some of our favourite objects in the exhibition, even though we're coming to you live from our homes today instead of from the theatre at Melbourne Museum because of the current lockdown here in Melbourne. Number 5. I'm wearing 2 hats today. I co-convene the lecture series, so I'll be your host. But as co-curator of the exhibition, I am also briefly going to present a couple of my favourites. Along with my colleagues, Dr. Ken Walker, Dr. Karen Rowe and Tim Ziegler, who will dive a little more deeply into their favourites. I will also facilitate a question and answer session at the end. So please, if you have any burning questions along the way, use the Q&A button on the bottom bar, post any questions that you have, and we will answer them live at the end of the session. But before we get into our favourites, I'd like to briefly describe the exhibition and our interpretive approach. Treasures of the Natural World is an exhibition of over 200 important objects from the Natural History Museum in London. The exhibition charts a course through seminal moments that changed Western science and shaped our very understanding of the natural world. Museums Victoria and the Natural History Museum in London have much in common. We both care for extraordinary collections and support world-leading research. And for both institutions, it is our exhibitions that provide that moment of connection between the stories we hold and the wider society. When we began thinking about how to stage the exhibition here in Melbourne, we were privileged to be guided by the Ulange Knowledge Group, made up of elders from across Victoria, who emphasised for us the interconnectedness of humanity with the world around us. They encouraged us to see these objects and specimens as treasured guests that travel the world to share their vital stories about life on Earth. They also asked us to reach out to some of the First Nations communities these objects have come from and to seek permission to tell their stories and use their language names for animals and places. That collaboration has influenced so much of our approach, including the international communities we have collaborated with, the design of the exhibition, and even the materials that we've used. The exhibition is constructed from over 2,000 recycled boxes, which at the end of the exhibition will be composted, a first for us. The results are, I hope you will agree, beautiful and impactful. Along the way, we hope visitors will be inspired to protect the greatest treasure of all, the natural world itself. For we are not outside of nature. We never were. We are a part of the great web of life, a small part, but a disproportionately powerful part. So now, onto our favourite treasures from the show. I'm going to kick us off. This is an ichthyosaur, a marine reptile that swam and hunted the oceans that covered Britain 200 million years ago. It's an amazing animal, but I'm not a scientist. I'm a history curator, and I'm drawn to the story of its collector. It's a fascinating tale of women in STEM in the 19th century. This is Mary Anning and her pet dog, Trey. She was born in 1799, and as a child, she helped her father collect fossils along what is now known as the Jurassic Coast in Dorset. They sold the fossils to tourists at her father's seafront cabinet maker shop in Lyme Regis. Following his death in 1810, when she was only 11, Mary took over the fossiling work to keep the family financially afloat. And at only 12, she painstakingly dug out a 5.2 metre long skeleton, a very strange skull, with a very strange skull. This job took her many, many months, and by the time she was done, it was clear she had discovered something truly extraordinary. Anning's mysterious specimen was studied and debated for years, but eventually it was named Ichthyosaurus. Like most girls at the time, Mary had little formal education, but she was able to read, and she taught herself geology and anatomy to assist in her work. The work was long and hard, and she set out daily with only a basket and pick and her loyal dog, Tray. The cliffs were perilous, particularly in winter months when she had to work quickly to retrieve fossils exposed by landslides before they would crumble into the sea. Rockfalls happened often, and she had many near misses. In fact, she eventually lost her beloved dog Tray to a landslide. In those sometimes treacherous conditions, she went on to find the first complete skeleton of a plesiosaur, a marine reptile so bizarre that scientists thought it was a fake. She wasn't present for any of those discussions, though, as the Geological Society didn't allow female members. She also unearthed the UK's first known remains of a pterosaur, believed to be the largest flying animal ever. She purchased a home and built a shopfront and built up her trade at a time when women were not allowed to own property or even vote. She prepared and identified specimens with more skill and knowledge than almost anyone in the UK. But scientists rarely credited her for in their scientific papers, even when they were writing about her discoveries. But she had a small and loyal group of supporters who rallied around her at times and acknowledged her expertise. And one of these was very well known to Australians. Ludwig Leichhardt called her the Princess of Paleontology. Anning died in 1847 without the credit or accolades she deserved. But the history of science is littered with this kind of neglect. But thankfully, she is now acknowledged as one of the most influential figures in early paleontology. And her specimens are held by major museums around the world, allowing scientists to continue to make sense of the natural world. And I hope you'll enjoy her ichthyosaur when you come to the show. Just stop sharing my screen. Thank you. Now, I'd like to invite my co-curator on the exhibition, actually, Dr. Ken Walker. Ken is the Senior Curator of Entomology at Museums Victoria. Ken helps to manage the museum's collection of 2 million insect specimens, which is used to identify insects of concern for the public, as well as for agriculture, medical and biosecurity matters. And I can't wait for him to share his pick of the exhibition, the Queen Alexandra's Birdwing butterfly. Over to you, Ken.
Thanks, everyone. I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this country, the people of the Boon Wurrung and Woiwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and I too pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As Beck said, my talk's about Queen Alexandra birdwing butterfly. The first peoples of the area where this butterfly occurs called it Darrakul, and scientifically we call it Ornithoptera alexandra. And here it is. These are specimens actually in the exhibition. The left one is the female and the right is the male. And they are my favourite objects. There's quite a few insects in the Curators exhibition, but these are my favourite objects. Now, birdwing butterflies are best known of all butterflies. They're large and the males have spectacular colours. They're so-called birdwings because they are fast and strong flyers, much more like birds, not the typical fluttering flights of most butterflies. There are 3 groups or genera of birdwings and about 59 species. And here are the three groups. The first is called Trogonoptera, and it has 2 species. The second is called Troides, and it has 21 species. And the third is Ornithoptera, which has 36 species. And here's where they occur. Troides has got the largest distribution. It occurs throughout China, India, Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Borneo, and right on down through New Guinea, but it doesn't go into the Solomon Islands and it doesn't come into Australia. Trogonoptera, with just its 2 species, occurs only in Sumatra and Borneo, and Ornithoptera occurs primarily in New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and also in northeastern Australia. Indeed, we have 3 species of birdwings in Australia. Up in the North Queensland, there's Ornithoptera euphorion, Ornithoptera priamus, and down in southeast Queensland and northeastern New South Wales is Ornithoptera richmondia. These are our largest butterflies. I'd like you just to look at the images on the right and notice the red patch on the thorax. I'll speak about that later on. All birdwings have this patch. Queen Alexander's birdwing is the most treasured butterfly in the world. The female is the largest butterfly in the world. It's bigger than a dinner plate, and it can measure up to 30 centimetres across the forewings. All female birdwings are coloured dark brown with white stripes. However, the males have brilliant colours of golden yellow, green yellow, or even blue-green. And here are some of these wonderful male coloured birdwings. There's Ornithoptera croetius. And I'd like you to look at the wings, the forewings. Look how large they are, and they're not rounded. They're slender and they're sculpted. They're designed to cut into the air and to give tremendous lift to the butterfly. The hind wings are almost like rudders. While I'm talking about the hind wings, I'd like you to look at the hairs on the inner margins of the hind wings that are brushing against the abdomen. This is another characteristic of the bird wings, and I'll be speaking about those hairs later. But look at the massive wings. Now, Ornithoptera croetius was actually Alfred Russel Wallace, who features in our Treasures exhibition. He collected and named the species in 1859. There's a wonderful story about Wallace and Charles Darwin that's worth seeing in the exhibition. Here's Ornithoptera rothschildi, and I've chosen this another one of the birdwing butterflies because this species was named after Lord Walter Rothschild, who also features in the Treasures exhibition. Rothschild donated 2.5 million butterflies to the Natural History Museum in London in 1939, and I'll be speaking about him later. Here's Ornithoptera paradisea, and look at those forewings compared to the hind wings, just a magnificent butterfly, but you can see the strength. They're the powerhouse of the butterfly. They really are. The hind wings are more like rudders. And again, notice the hairs on the inner margin of the hind wings. Ornithoptera chimera, Ornithoptera victoriae. And here's one of the species that occurs in Australia, Ornithoptera priamus. And here's my favourite, the male of Ornithoptera alexandrae and the female of Alexandrae. Now here's a video that it's not a great video, but it's the best I could find that shows them actually in flight in their native habitat. Here is the female. You can see that red marking very clearly. And here's the male. One of my bucket lists of when I retire is to actually go up to New Guinea and to be able to see some of these birdwing butterflies alive. It'd be an actual thrill. Ornithoptera alexandrae life cycle takes between 5 and 7 months. The females lay eggs on the pipevine plant called Para Aristolochia schlechteri. A female can lay about 240 eggs during her 3 to 4 month adult lifespan. And those are eggs on the right-hand side. They're enormous for butterfly eggs. The pipevine gets its name from the pipe-like shape of the flower. The leaves contain a poison called aristolochic acid, which concentrates in the body of the caterpillar and remains in the body of the adult. It doesn't affect the butterfly, but the poison affects the liver and kidneys of vertebrates. The caterpillar hatches, it eats its own eggshell, then it eats only the leaves of the pipevine. The caterpillar advertises the poisons in its body with those red-coloured fleshy tubercles, and the caterpillar stage is about 6 weeks. Now notice also those yellow forked appendages in the middle and at the front of the head. The middle yellow saddle fork helps to break up the colour patterns of the caterpillar, whereas the head, the yellow fork head, it's called the osmetrium, only extends when the caterpillar is threatened, and it produces pungent odours to deter predators. I've seen the birdwings in Australia of the caterpillar, and when something's on their back, they flip their head back and try and dab, particularly ants, with the osmetrium. The pupal stage is about 6 weeks in length, and can you see there, I hope that the pupae is suspended by a single thread of silk attached to the vine. Now the male pupae have dark patches on the wing cases, and this is a male. Adults of both sexes of birdwings have red patches on the thorax to signal poisons in their body from eating the larval food plant. The adults of Queen Alexander's birdwing weigh as much as 12 grams, which is extremely heavy for a butterfly. Male birdwing butterflies have this dense hair cover on the inner margins of their hindwings. Here's Queen Alexander's birdwing image from underneath, and you can see those hairs, and here's a close-up. Before I talk about the hairs, notice that the abdomen has been cut down the middle and replaced with cotton wool. Normally we allow, when we pin any insect, we allow it to dry out, but when these are large-bodied insects, and particularly a lot of fat in the abdomen, if we would allow it to dry out, it would most likely rot. So with large things like praying mantids or stick insects, we tend to slice down the abdomen, remove the gut contents, and replace it with cotton wool. But it's the hairs I want to talk about. You can see them clearly here. During courtship flights, the male produces a liquid pheromone or a smell that they spread over these hairs. The male then flies just above and just in front of the female butterfly and brushes her antennae with these scented hairs, hoping to be accepted as a mate. Remember, the antennae of insects is their nose. Now, Lord Walter Rothschild, 1686 to 1937, was a wealthy naturalist who amassed the largest ever private zoology collection. He had millions of specimens which he donated to the Natural History Museum. But he also employed people around the world to collect for him. Here's Lord Walter Rothschild in Hyde Park, and he trained zebras to be able to pull his coach around. He was an amazing character, and he discovered a lot of things and did a lot of great work. Now here's Albert Stuart Meek, 1871 to 1943, and he collected bird and insect specimens and sold them to the Natural History Museum in London and also to the American Museums of Natural History. Actually, Meek finally retired to Bondi in Sydney. Rothschild employed Albert Meek to collect butterflies in New Guinea from 1906 to 1907 and then later in Australia. Here's an image of Meek inside a hut with some of the first peoples of New Guinea that helped him collect the specimens. Now in 1906, Meek saw a female Queen Alexander's birdwing flying high in the rainforest, but it was well above the reach of any kind of a butterfly net. So Meek decided the only way to collect the specimen was to shoot it. Meek used a shotgun with ultrafine buckshot that he normally used to collect small birds, and it didn't do too much damage to them. Here's the typical habitat of Queen Alexander's birdwing. You can see how high the rainforest is, and normally the butterflies fly amongst the very top to be able to get full sun. They really only come down into the canopy when the female is laying eggs. So you can see the problem that Meek had and why he decided to actually shoot the butterfly. Meek collected that female butterfly specimen, which he then sent to Lord Rothschild, who described it as a new species in 1907. The species name Alexandrae was to honour Queen Alexander of Denmark, the Danish wife of King Edward VII of England. Here is the actual specimen that Meek shot in 1906. This is at the Natural History Museum webpage, and anybody can pull it up, and you can see those holes in the wing. There's another image in a moment, you see the holes better. But underneath, you can see the type of the species was shot. It was the only specimen collected on that expedition. It was bequested to the museum in 1939 after Rothschild passed away. Underneath that is Northeast Coast, which would be in Meek's handwriting. And originally, he put it into the genus Troides, but it was later moved to the genus Ornithoptera. And it is the type specimen. So here's that same specimen here with a white background. You can clearly see the holes in the wings from this buckshot that Meek used. Amazing. In 1907, Meek found the caterpillars of this butterfly, and then he was able to breed out perfect specimens rather than shooting them. Now, Ornithoptera alexandra is now restricted to the Malangalas Plateau of the Oro province in New Guinea, but it once occurred north to the Kumasi River. And indeed, that's where the Kumasi River is mainly where Meek collected his specimens. You can see how much further south now the species is restricted to. Queen Alexander's Birdwing butterfly is now listed as endangered. It was protected by law in New Guinea in 1966, and it was listed on the CITES Appendix 1 in the same category as elephants in 1987. It is the only insect in that category, which bans all international trade. This species is now severely restricted in its distribution due to habitat loss caused by large-scale logging and oil palm plantations. In 2017, the first people of this area voted for conservation of the Malangalas Plateau, and the New Guinea government protected the entire plateau over 360,000 square hectares. It allows the first people to continue their sustainable land use practices, and importantly, to protect the rare species of birds and insects found mainly only in this area. And here's that female Queen Alexander's birdwing. As I said, it's one of my bucket lists to be able to get up and see these butterflies. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed that. That's my favourite specimen.
Dr. Karen Rowe is our curator of birds, and I've worked in the field with Karen many times. It's a joy to have you here today. Thanks, Karen. Karen's work combines museum collections and field work to track the distribution and diversity of species over time. Much of her work focuses on using new digital technologies to better find and monitor birds in the wild and engage communities in knowledge sharing and conservation of the natural world. So Karen, over to you to share your favourite object, the hummingbirds.
So we've already sort of started on a theme of the mid 19th century and what a remarkable time it was for the discovery and dissemination of knowledge about the natural and cultural world. And this object in the exhibition, this very object that you see on the screen right now is in the exhibition, is no different for the rest of the objects that you've heard about already. Now, an amazing time it must have been to live through the mid 19th century, because there were so many things happening and people had such an opportunity to experience the world even without traveling. Now, 1851 was the time of the Great Exhibition in London, and London was really sort of a hub of massive descriptions of new species and knowledge generation, the time of Darwin and Wallace and Mary Anning and other people as well. So this was a really amazing time to have been alive. Now, one of the big experiences that Londoners and Europeans in general could have experienced was to go to the Great Exhibition. And this is where they would have seen animals from around the world that they would never experience in real life. Now, one such person during this time period was John Gould. Now, Gould was a contemporary of Mary Anning as well, but he was one of the most famous ornithologists at the time. Now, he was describing new species. He was connected to collectors around the world, and many of those collectors were sending specimens to Gould to illustrate in his books, to trade to other museums, and all kinds of different, generating new knowledge. But Gould was also a businessman, and one of his unique insights during this time was to capitalize on the timing of the Great Exhibition. Now, exhibitors in the Great Exhibition were not allowed to charge admission for the display of their own, their cases of animals or anything that they were bringing to the exhibition. But Gould was a little bit smart, so he decided to capitalize on that foot traffic by building his own mini museum, and housing his new specimens. Now, Gould was fascinated with hummingbirds, and hummingbirds, as you may know, are remarkable and unique birds. They have beautiful colors, they're really marvelous, and they have amazing behaviors that people had never really heard about or seen before. And so what Gould did was decide to build display cases uniquely designed to maximize the marvelousness of hummingbirds. So the case that you saw at the beginning and that's in the exhibition is one of 24 cases that Gould built during the same time period. Now, these cases had glass on all sides and glass tops so that the light could be shining into them and that you could examine the specimens inside of them from all different angles. Now, the picture you see on the right here is one that was drawn from his hummingbird house that he had specially built in Regent's Park. Now, because he had his own little exhibition, he was able to charge admission and actually spectacularly benefited from this by generating what in today's money would have been over £200,000. So you can imagine why he would choose not to display his unique specimens at the Great Exhibition. And so he was able to create a new place for people to experience these. Now, these displays actually would rotate, so people could experience what they look like at all angles. And he had these special canopies built so that it would have protection over them and display them in the maximum light. Now, the cases that he had built after the Great Exhibition in London, his hummingbird house was around for a little bit longer. But he, once he closed that exhibition in 1852, a little bit after the Great Exhibition closed, he took them home with him. And so they stayed there at his residence for quite a while until his death. And it was after his death that the cases were purchased for the Natural History Museum in London's grand opening. And so they retained the cases, and the picture you see on the right and the image right now is what those display cases would have looked like on display within the Natural History Museum in South Kensington. It's interesting because the display cases were all different shapes. So the one that's in our exhibition that you'll see as soon as we open again is multifaceted and is not square, but a lot of the other cases were square, and each one was designed specifically for the animals in which it displayed. Now, hummingbirds in general were a real fascination for Gould, and it led to his monograph on the Trochilidae, which is actually the scientific name for the family of hummingbirds. And he was just blown away by hummingbirds, and so were a lot of people at the time. And his quote in the preface of the monograph, which was created quite a bit after the Great Exhibition, is that, referring to hummingbirds, these wonderful works of creation, my thoughts are often directed to them in the day, and my night dreams have not infrequently carried me to their native forests in the distant country of America. Now, keep in mind, John Gould had actually never been to America at the time that he started writing this book. He had just been receiving specimens from America of these hummingbirds. And so he didn't actually travel to America until 1854. When he saw his first hummingbird in New York. And it was amazing because he actually went to America at the wrong time to see hummingbirds. He was just really fortunate to be able to catch one flying by him while he was on a walk in Central Park. Now, the Natural History of London Museum really has a connection to Museums Victoria, which we sort of discover in linking the specimens that we have with those that are in the Natural History Museum. So Museums Victoria actually has its own hummingbird case, and this case was created thanks to Frederick McCoy, who was the founding director of the museum. Now, McCoy had a relationship with John Gould and was able to obtain specimens of hummingbirds that he was exchanged with the Natural History of London Museum. And so the specimens that McCoy got from John Gould came as study skins. So the picture on the left is not of hummingbirds, but that's what study skins look like. And this preparation is a very standard way in a museum that we try to prepare specimens so that they're easily compared and consistent among different animals within the same species and among different species. And so these specimens of hummingbirds from John Gould came to McCoy here in Melbourne and were actually turned into a magnificent display by the museum's own proprietors at the time. And the picture you see on the right is actually a close-up of some of those preparations that those proprietors would have made back then. And so this was a contemporary case, a little bit later than the ones that John Gould prepared, but still, an amazing display of the diversity and, sort of beauty of hummingbirds. Now, personally, hummingbirds are, to me, one of nature's greatest treasure. The family Trochilidae actually means small birds. So all hummingbirds are very small, and they are only found in the Americas, so North and South and Central America. Now, there are over 350 species, depending on who you talk to. There may be even more, because science is constantly revising how we define species based on new evidence on the shape or the function or the genetics of these animals. Now, all of these species actually diversified from within 22 million years, which is a more remarkable amount of time. And in part, it's because they live over a vast number of different habitats, and they're able to specialize very carefully on different pollinators. So these hummingbirds are actually really important pollinators in a lot of different ecosystems. They pollinate particular types of flowers, and there's actually some demonstrated coevolution between the design of a flower and the bill of a hummingbird. Now, these species are just remarkable. They live all the way from the sea down up to mountain peaks, and their greatest areas of diversity are in Colombia and along the Andes Mountains, which is a dramatically elevational gradient for these species to diversify. Hummingbirds really are small, and because they're birds, they're highly adapted to light lifestyle. So their bones are hollow. They have all kinds of different adaptations to reduce the amount that they weigh. And so your average hummingbird weighs only 4 grams. And so that's really less than the weight of a 10-cent coin. So you can imagine how amazing it is to pack so much into such a tiny little bird. Hummingbirds are the only group of birds actually that does self-propelled hovering flight. So they are able to move their wings in a way and are powerful enough to be able to hover at dramatically fast speeds. If you've ever been able to see the video footage of a hummingbird slowed down, it's just remarkable about the way that they're able to move their wings and feed on these different flowers. And so they're the only group of birds that does this. Kestrels and other birds of prey are able to hover, but they actually need wind in their faces to be able to do that hovering flight. Now, you can imagine that flying at these super fast speeds actually requires remarkable vision and visual processing capacity. So they have really unique brains and really amazing fields of view and density of rods and cones within their eyes to be able to capture so much information. They can really have the resolution that is unparalleled. We can't even see even closely to how well that they can. They have really, really fast metabolisms and heart rates and oxygen use. They are more finely tuned than some of the most elite athletes in the world. They have faster reflexes than fighter pilots, and they're able to withstand pressures of G-forces that even our, fighter pilots are not able to tolerate. So they are just this amazing bird that's also very beautiful. They're also capable of a behavior called torpor, where they go into sort of a suspended stasis where they're able to conserve energy and water loss because they have such high metabolism. So they need to constantly feed to maintain their the body. And so a lot of the birds that live in high elevations go into torpor at night just so that they can survive through the night. Now, hummingbirds, this would be a typical location where you would find hummingbirds flitting among the valleys and also along the tops of the the tops of the mountains here. But because of hummingbirds actually are under threat right now because of climate change. And in part, it's because of their unique adaptations to this high and fast lifestyle. And so when things warm, the amount of energy required to keep your body going goes up. And so these hummingbirds are already at their physiological limits. And so having that higher need to produce greater energy expenditure to gather the same amount of food is actually a real challenge for them. And so we're starting to see some populations declining. of hummingbirds because of these increased temperatures. So I hope you can see from all the way from London the amazingness of hummingbirds, and we hope that you're able to come back to the museum very soon to see them in person. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. That was fascinating. I love the hummingbird displays, but you really bring the animal alive for us as well. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Tim Ziegler. Tim is a collection manager. You may have seen him take over our Twitter account this week, giving you a little bit of an insight into today. He's the collection manager of vertebrate paleontology. He coordinates and provides care and access for 250,000 fossils, representing over 400 million years of deep time in Victoria. He also excavates and prepares fossils for the state collection and is proactive in connecting people around Victoria with the natural heritage of their home landscapes. Tim's going to share his deep knowledge of the moa, a true treasure of the natural world. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks again, and hi everyone. If you have any questions or curious about anything during the talk, please add it to the Q&A and we can talk afterwards. So my favourite treasure in this exhibition is the moa. And moa were giant flightless birds that evolved in New Zealand as the island's dominant megafauna. All moa are now extinct, but as late as the 1500s, 9 species lived across habitats from lowland valleys up to alpine heath as high as 2,000 metres. All moa were herbivorous, and they ranged from 30 kilos to nearly a quarter of a tonne in weight, and were up to 3.5 metres tall. The reason for us to talk about the moa today is in part that the Treasures exhibition shows off a remarkable specimen, the complete mounted skeleton of a heavy-footed moa, Pachyornis elephantopus, heavy-foot. She's standing about 5 feet tall, and while the massive hind limbs would have made her quite a slow walker, they were ideal for the habitat of swamps, grasslands, and broadleaf kauri forest where she would have lived. But then, why is there a moa in Treasures at all? Their fossil remains have been intensely collected, and they're well known in museums around the world. For me, in the history of paleontology, the story of the moa starts with the Natural History Museum, particularly its founder, Professor Richard Owen, 182 years ago. It's one thing to look at a reconstructed skeleton with a bill and a long neck, long legs, 3-toed feet, and see the similarities to a modern, say, ostrich or an emu. But none of that was yet available or known to Owen in 1839, aged 35. When he arranged the purchase of this single broken fragment of what looked like it was once a substantial bone. A Maori resident at Taranganui-a-Kiwa, Poverty Bay, on the North Island, had passed the bone to a colony trader, and it was sent via Sydney onto Owen in London. He interpreted it as a thigh bone, a femur, and based on the layered shaft wall and on the open honeycombed interior of the bone, he risked his reputation, in his words, to state that there had recently existed, or even still did exist, a gigantic bird in New Zealand the size of an ostrich. Owen quickly copped pretty strident criticism for making such a momentous claim on so little evidence. But his point quickly proved itself, as a steady stream of other bones were found and shipped to Europe from New Zealand. Within 5 years of that first proposal, Owen was able to pose here for his portrait with undoubted bones of the moa. His hand is clutching the tibia, shin bone of one. He continued to buy up specimens of moa from traders to attempt to construct a fuller picture of the skeleton, bone by bone, sometimes articulated, sometimes just one at a time. The recent fossil records of New Zealand and Australia were lifelong passions for Owen, and he published repeated descriptions, images, and accounts of the specimens as he acquired them. By 1879, 40 years after that initial claim, the elder Owen was photographed here again alongside a completed skeleton of the largest molar, Dinornis. I like this image because it captures to me the pride I think he felt in what had begun for him as speculation as a young man, and reached, probably in his mind, a finished understanding of the animal here. And he also can't resist to make that point once more. In the photograph, his left hand is resting on the mounted skeleton's femur, while in the other hand, he's holding still that corresponding first bone shaft, the first fragment from decades earlier. And again, I think there's a bit of pride in the expression. But I think it'd actually be a disservice to Owen's effort if we stopped our discussion there, because the science hasn't stopped. All modern moa went extinct in a window from 700 to 500 years ago, mainly impacted by hunting and the introduced animals of the Polynesian settlers who founded the Maori peoples. The sites of hunting camps and hearths where moa were cooked and eaten were still known to Maori centuries after the bird's extinction. And te reo Maori phrases still describe interactions with the moa and show awareness of their extinction. That recency also means, though, there's a physical record, a rich physical record of moa still in the landscape of New Zealand. And by its study as well, our modern understanding of this group of birds has really been enriched. So take, for example, the organic soft tissue remains of the moa. This is the head and the neck of one of the last surviving species, the upland moa, Megalapteryx didonus. It was found in 1878 by miners in a cave near Queenstown on the South Island, thankfully in a dry and steady environment, because the cave preserved in a mummified state the moa's skin, its eyeball, its tongue, even part of the windpipe or trachea. The tracheae in particular of the largest moa were much longer than their actual necks and looped down around their chest in a way that a few birds do today as well. What we think this tells us is that moa could have made powerful resonant calls like a whooping crane or a trumpeter swan or a very, very angry goose. At the other end of the animal, we can see claws, muscles, and even feathers preserved on mummified hind limbs. Moa plumage was hair-like and shaggy. For species living in the coldest habitats, it even grew right down onto the foot. Over 1,000 moa feathers have been found and studied so far, and they indicate the birds had a speckled appearance with colours a mixture of yellowish-brown, russet, purplish, grey, and white. These perfectly preserved feathers in particular are also on display in the Treasures exhibition. Specimens like this can be found because at least some moa used caves and shelters as regular roosts. And this has preserved something else very useful for us, their poo. Seed, leaf, and pollen remains from moa poo tells us that our heavy-footed moa grazed on water plants like watermilfoils and raspworts on the left, and shrubby herbs like maidenhair and tree daisy still in New Zealand on the right. We also see in their poo their gut parasites. There are microscopic eggs and cysts preserved containing nematode worms, flatworms, and single-celled protozoa. Moa probably picked up these parasites and passed them around one another while feeding near fresh water. By features of the skeleton alone, we see moa a part of the mostly flightless ratite bird group, along with living species like the emu, ostrich, and the cassowary and kiwi that are also here in Treasures. As well as looking externally to understand the moa, genetic scientists have recently examined residual moa DNA to understand the group's relationships and evolution. One outcome of this has been to refine the work of Owen and other earlier scientists, for example, to learn that several species named from large or small remains in fact represented female and male individuals of the same species. Like most large moa, female Pachyornis were much larger than the males. In fact, up to 3 times as heavy. And so with that, that's why I can say confidently that our heavy-footed moa in Treasures is a she. Genetic data helps us to interpret the moa's position among other birds more broadly too. Traditionally, the distribution of living ratites was thought to map well onto ancient continental breakup. Africa split from the supercontinent Gondwana 160 million years ago at the top here. So the ancestor of the ostrich in Africa and the extinct giant elephant bird in Madagascar would have been the first to diverge from other ratites. Then the ancestor of the moa and kiwi must have become isolated there in red as New Zealand drifted north away from Gondwana. The final separation of the southern continents, South America, Antarctica, and Australia, saw the isolation of founder populations for the emu and cassowary in Australia and 2 South American birds, the rhea and tinamou. So we thought, adding ancient DNA to a global data set of living birds, though, shows a big surprise for moa's place among the ratites. Moa and kiwi, despite being isolated together on New Zealand, aren't sister taxa at all. The kiwi's closest ancestor is actually the elephant birds from Madagascar, the largest genus of elephant birds weighing over 750 kilograms, the largest and heaviest birds of all time. And moa instead line up alongside the small, still capable of flight, South American tinamous. Geography and continental breakup no longer account for this pattern of evolution we see from mitochondrial DNA. Rather, ancient ratites must have been better able to disperse than they can today, likely because they were still able to fly. This creates a hypothesis that multiple times flighted ancestors have arrived to good country without large predators and subsequently quickly evolved a loss of flight. When would an opportunity like that have come across? Well, actually, we think the distribution of ratites around the world may have happened just after the end Cretaceous extinction of the dinosaurs and the loss and collapse of so many ecosystems globally. The story of the moa shows there's still so much to learn about our natural world, even after centuries of investigation. And the sense of wonder that enriches our lives when we look at these things, I think it's the same one that motivated characters of Treasures like Owen, like Mary Anning, Meek and Rothschild, John and Elizabeth Gould, Frederick McCoy, Charles Darwin, Alfred Russel Wallace. Everyone, I feel like we're all on the same journey still. But thank you all for listening. So if you're not quite inspired to go fossicking through moa poo, I hope you'll enjoy the exhibition and join us there instead.
Another absolute treasure for me is the one we closed the exhibition with. It's this very special nugget, Curators, or gold nugget. It's the only one we know for sure came from Victoria, the only thing in the exhibition that we know for sure. It was extracted from Tanarong and Dja Dja Wurrung border country near modern-day Heathcote during the gold rushes of the 1850s. And we were privileged to collaborate with Uncle Larry Walsh and Auntie Justice Nelson, who generously shared with us their perspectives on why it's a true treasure of the natural world. We worked with them to produce a video, which you see in the exhibition. We closed the exhibition actually with Uncle Larry and Justice. I'll give you a hint. They don't think it's a treasure because it's a rare example of a crystalline form nugget, although it is really rare and scientifically significant. And they don't consider it treasure because it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, although that's true too. I'm going to leave it to them to share why they think it's significant. Over to Uncle Larry and Auntie Justice Nelson.
My name's Larry Walsh, sometimes known as Uncle Larry, and I'm Tanarong Elder. I'm of the Nire Bala clan, which means cave people.
I'm Justice Nelson of the Jara people, Jaja Wurrung language group and the Wangara clan. Our values weren't a monetary value. Gold to us was part of our lands, it was part of country, but we had no use for it. It was too soft for us to use, so it didn't make a good tool. I was lucky enough to be born and raised on country, and just to see the changes in country in my 42 years of living is unbelievable.
Unfortunately, it's been devastated in the past through gold mining and building the shafts.
And nothing grows there anymore. The ground has been completely devastated.
So all these things they were doing that was destroying not just our landscape, but our sources of food, our sources of knowledge of all them seasons, eh?
Para mamunya giurunga, which means literally don't touch it and to wait a while because it's growing up. And I think that is the perfect phrase for our people and how we lived on country. I think it's an actual phrase that society today could use.
If we can spend time learning that everything we see and hear is interconnected with itself in the bush, and you can be part of that connection.
Well, because people are country, we are country, and we're so interconnected you can't have one without the other. People need to learn to respect country and look after it.
Yeah, it's about respect, but also love. See, how can you destroy something you love?
It's such a beautiful way to end our favourite treasures today, and really a poignant way to end the exhibition with Uncle Larry's plea to care for the greatest treasure of all, the natural world. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you at the next NB lecture. Thank you.